Hello everyone. Um, so I promised I'd do a video on the history of Wrenthock, and so this is that video, because I have other things I could do videos on, but I'm going to start with this one, go from there. So, the history of Wrenthock. Wrenthock was a barren world. It still is. I mean, nothing grows there outside of the farms on Beldenhive, which are like vertical farms, completely enclosed. There's no natural plant life, no natural life of any kind, really. The atmosphere is it's enough that it holds pressure. It's cold, um, but not cold, like absolute void cold. It's about as cold as Antarctica, if you want to make an Earth comparison. So doable if you have the right gear, but not something you want to do. In terms of weather, there's no rain or snow. A lot of wind whipping, but that varies depending on the day, solar positioning, etc., etc. It's a whole science of predicting, and usually uh, every few years, there's one that's problematic enough to cause actual damage and prevent people from working on construction projects and stuff. But other than that, it's just a minor annoyance at most. But that is a thing. Oh yeah, so Wrenthock was settled at about the turn of the millennium. So right at the beginning of the 41st millennium. And it was settled by the Imperium, and the moon was settled by the Mechanicus, and there was a whole argument about that I talked about in the last video. And for the first 100 years or so, things went relatively smoothly. The planetary governor was appointed by the Ministorum. His name was Adave Monas. Yeah, Adave Monas. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what I called him. Adave Monas. And Adave Monas was, by all accounts, a fairly sensible man-ish. He wasn't, he was, 10th son from a wealthy family from another system, so he wasn't, he was used to getting what he wanted and a bit of a spoiled brat, but he wasn't overly extravagant. He was relatively sensible and knew what he was doing, for the most part. So, he was put in charge, and it began as hollowing out underground tunnels for the beginning of people living, and they built in water purification, air purification systems that just have been tacked onto over the years instead of re-updated, so they're kind of meh. Although that sewer pipe system does allow for the growth of these mushrooms that actually are a huge part of the food source for Wrenthock. But that's about the only thing that grows on Wrenthock, and that was probably imported from some other world and twisted, and no one knows what world it was imported from. It came in on the first couple of ships. It took to the sewage pipes. People started eating them. No one died. It became a thing. It was lost to the histories. So for the first couple 100 years, things went relatively well. Maybe not the first couple 100 years, but the first 100 or so. It went relatively well. They built the tunnel systems, and the Minister was sending in new ships of settlers from all over the Imperium, and that was doing pretty well. Now, when the uh, first children started being born there, that's when people started to notice the thing with the kids. When they noticed that all the babies were girl babies, and everyone was like, "That's weird." And it was a weird overarching pattern. It was actually Dr. Caltrob, um, who he was a well-known doctor, and his um, family continues to be doctors to this day on Wrenthock, or to the current period of the end of the 41st millennium. Current day is a weird phrase to use when you're talking about future, but the far future especially. But yeah, no, till continued indefinitely afterward to become doctors. But the theory of that, he developed the theory, figured out the the particle that was causing it, and it was just indicative of the air on Wrenthock, and it couldn't be filtered out. And everyone was just like, well, that's a thing. So they tried various filter methods, and quite a few, and they couldn't get the numbers down on any, except by importing air from off-world, which quickly became ridiculously expensive rather than processing and filtering the air from the planet itself and adding various gases to it, which is the current process, and is actually a very okay. When I say current, I mean 900s, 41st millennium as current for the Warhammer canon. All right, so that will save me having to explain anything crazy about it. But yeah, the that happened. So they built the tunnels, and then they began the above ground construction, and they kept, after a while, the Ministorm stopped sending in these ships and basically put um, the planetary governor and his cadre of chosen enforcers in charge of maintaining order and doing as they saw fit. And we're just like, yep, you're on your own now. Good luck. So he ran the country, and there were several wealthy families who managed to acquire some land, and they became very prominent, but didn't have power, which was a recipe for disaster. But what happened, not necessarily a recipe for disaster, but it did create a faction that was easily manipulated. And then what ended up happening is, as the first generations to be born fully there and not just, imported, and they stopped getting imported workers, there was a lot more women than men. So women started going into the works like mining. Now there had been female miners and female factory workers before, but it had always been kind of, especially among the miners, it had been an oddity. Most women didn't work in the mines, and most men did. And having a few female coworkers was doable for the miners. They managed pretty well with that. When it started to get a lot more female, the few men left kind of got their fragile male egos couldn't really handle it, I think is the best way to put it. It became a source of frustration for a lot of the men who were working and the few who were born, and then people started trying to keep them out of the mining trades, and where it was very much the cultural zeitgeist because of where everyone came from that men would go into the mining trades, and that kind of tension between that sort of caused a lot of civil unrest. And then there was the problem of compatibility. Now, in any given society, uh, not everyone, of course, is straight in any society, but enough people are straight that if the difference between men and women are not kept relatively equal, and you try to have monogamous relationships be an enforced ideal, then you start to get into some ugly territory. And you're seeing this in modern day Earth of the 21st millennium in China, and where and it's not even that much of a skewing, but just having more men than women has become a bit of an issue, and that's it. And it's not enough to make a difference sociologically, and that's not even half of what Wrenthock's going through. So I would imagine, and it did. It caused a lot of unrest and arguments, and there were certain contingencies from the settlements that had very strong ethos of heterosexual monogamous relationships being the way to go, and um, having a society where that did not work created a lot of a certain contingent of the population was very, very upset by that. And having that, and having the male miners threatened by that, it just created a lot of societal tension. And Khorne took advantage of that. The Chaos God Khorne, who is, if you don't know Warhammer, the god of uh, rage and warfare and violence. He's the embodiment of fury and bestial desire to watch others suffer, and the cold, primal, physical destruction of things. Um, uh, and uh, they became infested by the god Corn and started worshiping him. Their cults of Corn began to crop up. Now, this, as anyone familiar with Warhammer 40k will know, is a very bad thing when that happens. And this video is running long, so here's what we're going to do. This is going to be part 1. I'm going to, after work, maybe today, I will film part 2 and put it up. I'll put them both up at the same time, so by the time you watch this, the second part will already be up. I'm just going to film them separately, so look out for that. And yeah, thank you for listening to me rant about a fictional country, or fictional planet, rather. And I love you guys. See you soon.